Welcome back to Rollin with the Punches. I am so happy you're here. Do you feel that? I feel that. Do you feel it? Are you feeling it, Mr. Krabs? I don't know if you guys are too... I would be curious to know if my demographic, if that hit with you guys. Let me know if that hit with you. Because if it didn't, then you're probably really confused. But if you aren't feeling it, Mr. Krabs, that feeling is Daytona. It's approaching. Quickly. Somebody call Larry Mack. I don't know how many days we have until the Daytona 500, but it's a-coming. It's a-coming quick. And I can feel it. I really can. I mean, it's a busy time in the world of J-Punch. I leave tomorrow for Daytona, and I know what you're thinking. Hello? The 500 isn't for another, week and a half. And you would be correct. But for the 5th year in a row now, I will be going down a little bit early to cover the World Series of Asphalt over at New Smyrna Speedway. So if you aren't familiar with the World Series, it's 9 straight nights of racing. Everything from modifieds to super late models to 602. So many different types of racing. So many races a night, 9 straight nights. It's just an awesome way to kick off the season. And I'm doing all 9 nights again this year, which is a hefty load, but I'm looking forward to it. And, you get to see your friends, you get to work with your broadcast teams again. So I said it last episode, it always feels like the first day of school. It's getting there. I'm getting excited to see my classmates, But like I said, we're kicking off the season. Daytona's coming quick, which means we're coming off of the Clash. And I thought really hard about whether or not I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on the Clash right now, and I just don't think I can do it, because I don't think we have enough time today. But honestly, if you saw me this weekend, you know. If you saw me around Bowman Gray, you know. I was giddy. I was like a kid in a candy store all weekend long. I couldn't wrap my brain around it. And I feel like everybody I saw, whether it was coworkers or just race fans, I was like, can you believe this? Everybody just, I can't even put it into words, really. And I was fortunate enough on Sunday. I don't really know how I found myself there, but I was on the track in the infield for the driver intros, the whole pre-race festivities, and walking out onto the track there from the pit exit with the entire place lit up in red. So you're looking around and you can just kind of barely make out the faces, but you see the cars and they're rolling out. And you're looking around and there's 18,000 people packed in here and the lights are going, and it was the most unreal thing. I really can't put it into sufficient words. Not yet, at least. So that's a little bit of my Clash emotion. I just told you guys that I wasn't going to give you my thoughts on the Clash, and then I just went on a whole spiel about my thoughts on the Clash, but I'll give you more in-depth thoughts another time. Or if you see me in Daytona, come ask me. I'd love to yap your ear off about how excited I was to watch Cup Cars at Bowman Gray. But I won't talk for too much longer, because the guest that I have on this week likes to talk a lot. If you know him, you know he does. And I can say that because he's my dad. And I got that from him. I like to talk a lot too. So you put the two of us together, you get a lot of content. That being said, what this conversation is a lot of content. Last time I was home, I sat down with my dad and we talked about everything. I mean, everything from him telling me stories about learning from Ned Jarrett, both just in life and in broadcasting. We talked about some of our thoughts on the current state of NASCAR and some of the teams and the new ownership and some of the driver and ride changes. We talked a little bit about my career and what I've learned from him, and really we covered it all, as we typically do when we sit down and start talking racing. So I'm excited to share this conversation with you guys. It'll be split up, so you'll be getting bits and pieces here over a few episodes, but hopefully you find something interesting out of this little punch powwow that we had going on over at my parents' house. I will say quickly, too, before I get into the episode, bear with me. I'm walking on eggshells on how I want to say this. Thank you to a very funny friend of ours on the internet, a very specific NASCAR account who puts out quite unique, but always entertaining and truly hilarious content, gave us a very in-depth, well-rounded, well thought out, beautifully edited, might I add, tribute, if you will, if you want to call it. I don't really know what you would call it. I'm going to call it a tribute because that makes it sound a little more professional than it was. But no, you know who you are. We appreciate you. And we love you over here at Rollin' with the Punches. We really do. All right, I'm going to get into the interview. So without further ado, here is me and my dad. That was weird. Okay, here's my dad.
I'm blessed to do this in the sport for a long time, and every day I think of another story or someone I met or something that just triggers a memory.
Well, because not to you said it first. I've been around a long time, so I'm not trying to be the one to age you here or anything. But this is more of a respect thing than an aging thing, so hear me out.
Yeah.
What's amazing is that so many of the stories that you get to tell, and when you talk about the people so casually that you were surrounded by and with through your career, those are the people that built this sport. Now, of course, NASCAR was around for a long time before you were in it and working in it, but the reality of the era of broadcasting, the era of media, the stars, the players that were really running the sport at the time that you were as involved as you were the ones that truly laid the foundation for what we have today when we look at NASCAR.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, I've done a lot of broadcasts. I've done a lot of award shows in New York, and I was thrilled and honored to host the NASCAR Awards banquet for a number of years. The awards evening, rather,
which looks very different nowadays.
It does look different.
Back in your day, it was like glamorous. I mean, not that it's not glamorous today, but like it's a little different having it at the Hall of Fame. It has a different ambiance, I should say. Right. It's just a different aura when you guys had it at the Waldorf.
I mean, there were tons of jokes, as you can imagine. Back then, you take a bunch of race car drivers and a bunch of race people and take them to New York City at Christmas time at the Waldorf Astoria, in the Grand Ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, where I grew up when I was little watching Guy Lombardo on New Year's Eve, from the Grand Ballroom. And people would make all these jokes about the Clampetts coming to town, et cetera, putting the NASCAR Winston Cup champion's car out in front of the Waldorf on the street, and
a little Beverly Hillbillies-esque feeling.
And the first couple of years, they had to do a lot to make sure that car didn't get towed, because they had the local, city police. They had no idea somebody parked this car. It has a number on it, but who cares? I mean, they were
it's a taxi cab, got a lot of bumper stickers.
And so they finally, had a lot of people, that were bought into being in New York and that time of year. But I think one of the biggest honors I had in the early years was being asked to be on the voting committee when they started the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And I got a call from an executive in Daytona that said, "You've been around a long time, Doc, and we'd love to have you your input on this committee." And I said I would be so honored. And it was in the month of May, which unfortunately I spent the whole month of May in Indianapolis. I was in Indy. But I flew out of Indianapolis, came here to be in that room the first few years when I was on the committee for 4 or 5 years, and we voted, on the members of the Hall of Fame. One of the things I remember, you talk about the people that built the sport. I remember looking through that booklet that they gave us that day, and we're sitting in rows, and I remember I was sitting in the front row in the middle section, and on the end of the row was Ken Squire, legendary CBS announcer, and beside him was my mentor, like my second father, Ned Jarrett, and then myself, and then beside me was Tony George from Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and then beside him was Edsel Ford. So that was our row. And so you think about, I'm sitting there thinking about these people that I'm sitting around, it's pretty remarkable. But, over the first few years, I remember when someone was being nominated to be in the Hall of Fame, they had to leave the room so everybody could talk about him. And I remember when Ned Jarrett was nominated to the Hall of Fame, he's like my mentor, and I have so many Ned stories. I'm so thankful that I spent all those hours riding with him to and from racetracks, and he took me as his assistant and his protege or whatever, if you want to call it. I'd be honored to be called his protege. But he left the room, and we're talking about, okay, here's a guy up for the Hall of Fame who was a driver and two-time NASCAR champion, retired very early in his 30s. And there's a lot of stories about that, but and then went and moved to the broadcast booth for CBS and then ESPN, et cetera, et cetera. Worked for Anheuser-Busch. He was the Busch beer guy. Ran the Anheuser-Busch poll program, et cetera. So
Yeah, I mean, Ned gave, now that you lay it out like that, Ned gave back to the sport in so many different
Ned gave
areas.
back so many ways, and then somewhat. So they're talking about Ken Squire commented about him being on the CBS telecast and what a major asset he was at CBS, and some of the guys talked about what a great, the great driver he was back in the early days when he won those championships, and et cetera, and what he did for Anheuser-Busch, bringing corporate, because I was sitting at the table in Daytona with Ned as Ned's guest when August Busch, all the people came in from Anheuser-Busch to announce was the weekend of the very first ever Busch Clash. And it was the Friday night before the Busch Clash, and we're all in this room with all the Busch family from St. Louis and everybody involved in what became a legendary event over the years. Anyway, so Ned, because of Ned, I was there. Anyway, so Ned left the room, and someone asked about Ned. Does anyone have a story about any other role he played? And so I stood up and I said, and I looked around and I said, look, Ned is so deserving. I said he's done so much for me, but let me just tell you one quick story that to me sort of wraps up who Ned Jarrett is with regard to this sport. I said I was riding with Ned to Darlington, South Carolina for the Labor Day weekend Southern 500, and it was the day before qualifying, and we're riding down. It's late August, like the last day of August, and it's 100 degrees in the shade down there, and we're riding along in the Busch van. It's got the beautiful mountains of Busch painted on the side of it. He's got the whole back of the van of that portable cooler stocked full of iced down Busch beer, because we're going down for pole qualifying that afternoon. And it's in mid-morning. We're riding by. We're about 5 miles from the racetrack from that 2-lane road, and there's dirt fields on both sides, and there's a farmer out here plowing in this field about 100 yards from the road, and all you can see is a big cloud of dust and his tractor and everywhere. And so Ned pulls over, and we're like 5 miles from the track. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'll be right back. And he goes in the back of the van. I hear him open the back door of the van, the Busch van, and I watch him. He tromps out across this plowed field and starts waving at this farmer on a tractor, and stops the farmer, and the farmer's looking at him, waving, wiping his forehead, and it's like a sauna out there. And I see Ned hand him this towel, and he had gotten a couple of ice cold Busch beers out of the back of the van and handed them to him. And the guy takes his hat off and is waving his bandana, waving his forehead and waving to Ned. Ned gave him something out of his pocket and came back and got in the van. And I said, Ned, what was that about? He said, we're 5 miles from the track. This guy's lived here probably his whole life, and he told me he was farming, and he said, it's 100 degrees out here. And he said, I'm thinking, I didn't know if he drank or not, but if he did, he said he might be a Bud guy or he might be another brand, blah, blah, blah. But nothing's going to taste better to him right now than this ice cold Busch beer. And he's going to become a Busch beer fan. So number one, my Busch beer deal is taken care of. He said, then I reached in my pocket and said, you ever been to Darlington? He said, they mean that noisy track down there? And he said, yeah. He said, we got qualifying later today. He said, I got some free tickets for you to come to qualifying. Once you go in and bring the family, just come down. He said, these tickets will let you into a section, and we'll have more of that cold Busch beer there. And he said, might just do that. So he said, so now I've turned this guy, hopefully he'll come down and he'll see a little bit of qualifying and want to come to the race. So but either way, the guy's going to remember somebody stopping and handing him ice cold Busch beer and maybe trying to get him to the racetrack. I said, so if that doesn't mean that Ned Jarrett is an ambassador and deserving of being in the Hall of Fame, I don't know what does. And I sat back down and people applauded. And, fortunately, that was my small contribution to telling people who Ned Jarrett really was and how important he was, not only as a driver, but as a broadcaster, but someone just riding down the road trying to say, maybe I can get one more fan, to the product I'm endorsing, I'm working for, and also to the sport I love so much.
Well, and that's one of those things when people talk about it's what you do when no one's watching, really.
Right.
That wasn't about being seen. It wasn't about representing Anheuser-Busch in front of everyone and wearing the brand. I mean, that was about living NASCAR, living the sport, living the brand, genuinely wanting to broaden the fan
Yeah,
base
yeah.
out of just love and hard work.
Oh, yeah.
That's the other thing. I mean, that right there to me is just hard work, respecting hard work. Him seeing this
Yeah.
man out in the field and going, I'm on my way to work. He's at work right now. I'm going to go, in a way, pay my respects. And that's really like what this whole blue collar sport was built on.
Well, and remember back in those days when I would drive to the track with Ned, Ned would come to medical school if I could get away on a Friday, and he would pick me up. I had no car that would get to a racetrack. I had no. He'd pick me up and we'd drive, and I'd get to hear all these great stories about him racing and drivers he ran with the Pearsons and all the wonderful stories that he would share. And then we would get to the racetrack, and he would back that Anheuser-Busch van in right behind pit wall at the middle of pit road, wherever we were, Darlington, I remember specifically. And we did live qualifying on WFMX radio, which is a 50,000 watt country music station out of Statesville. Now that 50,000 watt station, there wasn't cable television back then. So if you wanted to listen to NASCAR qualifying, there was no live TV, there was no live MRN qualifying or PRN back then. That was it. So, but that station carried all the way into West Virginia, Maryland, and all the way into parts of Florida. That's how strong that signal was. So, big time country music. So we'd go on the air from there, and Ned would push that van in, and he'd be sitting in the front seat, and the passenger seat would be me for a while. And then when qualifying started, the drivers would go out to qualify. They would come down pit road and climb out, and they'd wipe their face off, talk to a couple of crew guys, and they'd walk over and jump in the van for two reasons. First of all, the van was air conditioned, and they'd come in and talk a little bit and plug their sponsors, and they'd be talking about. And he knew they were live on WFMX. Now think about that. These are the elite of the elite NASCAR Cup Series drivers, and they're in a van talking about their car qualifying at Darlington. And
out of the car.
It's right out of the car. I mean, they're just a few feet of still sweating fire.
Yeah.
Now some of them, because that was the last event of the day, some of them Ned always had a cooler there. Ed always had a cooler there where he could offer them a cold beverage, and some of them would choose the sponsor's beverage. But then toward the end of the show, with about 15 minutes to go in qualifying, Ned would have to take a rolling cooler he had, and he was the Anheuser-Busch representative for NASCAR for the Busch Pole Award, and he'd had to go to Victory Lane to get ready to do the Busch Pole Award. So I would sit in Ned's seat. And if there wasn't a driver there during qualifying, or if another driver had, or somebody that I would be sitting in the front seat sharing the qualifying show with Ned. Well, Ned got out to go do the Busch Pole Award. I would sit and host the final minutes of the show and take us off the air. Well, that's how I learned to be broadcasting. But toward the end of the show, we had some of the slower drivers, and I remember any time that Marty Robbins was there, legendary country music singer, legendary country music Hall of Famer, he would come and sit in the front seat, and just his colloquial, down home, easygoing. I loved the fact that he loved NASCAR, but and he was talking to his people because the country music fans were listening on the radio. So that brings me to the story of doing the race in Atlanta in November of 1982. And it was, I think it was the Atlanta Journal 500, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was the first week of November of 1982. And Marty Robbins had been driving a long time, when he could, intermittently. He had a car prepared by Cotton Owens, and it was always purple and yellow, purple car with yellow numbers. It would stand out. And he just loved the sport. He was never going to be a superstar. He just loved being in and being around the guys. And he had some health issues anyway. So everyone was saying this might be Marty's last race, and it was the last race of the year. So Junior Johnson had prepared a car for Marty to come run Atlanta. Now that's like saying Rick Hendrick has prepared a car for him to race his last race at Atlanta. Well, early in the race, there was a little bump, there was a little accident in the race, and a couple cars were involved. And Marty he pulls his wrecked car down into the garage area in Atlanta. Back when the garage was when the straightaway was the other side of the Atlanta, hadn't been converted. So I'm walking along with and the race was only halted for a lap or two, and then it went back to green. So there's nobody in the garage except just, the garage is empty except Marty's pulled his car way over to the other side of the garage where the slower cars and the independents parked, and the people didn't have points parked. And so I'm walking through the garage with my camera crew, and we're walking, and I can see him climb out of the car, and I'm watching, and he climbs out of the car pulls the window net down, and he just leans against the car, and he looks around, looks to his right, over to the turn, and watches the cars come through, turn forward. He looks up at the grandstands. He's looking at all the people. He's like gazing around the track, and my runner with me says, "What are you looking at, Doc?" I said, "As a medical doctor in the ER, I've seen that look before. He's saying goodbye. This is his last time. He's looking around to see everything that he got to be a part of in his lifetime, and I think this is probably it for him." Well, I don't even remember saying that to my runner, who reminded me later, a month later, that I said that. So I go over to do Marty, and we did the interview, and he was typical, colloquial, funny, appreciative, respectful Marty Robbins. And if I'm not mistaken, that was November 7th, 1982. A week or so later, he had more health issues, and he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. And he basically got out of a hospital bed, I think, to be able to go and be there for that induction. And then a month and 1 day from that race, on December 8th, he passed away. We lost Marty. He had another heart attack, and we lost him. So when that happened, my runner called me that day and said, "Dr. Punch, do you remember what you said to us on the way to do that interview? You said he's saying goodbye." And indeed he was. So I'll never forget how special it was. I get chills to this day knowing that I got to be a part of being around Marty Robbins and being there for his last race and for his last interview at the track. But I also got to see him with a smile on his face and that mustache and everything. And as he was looking around, at the stands and at the fans and everything he had gotten to be a part of in his life, knowing that it was probably never going to happen again.
I love hearing that, that he took the time to do that. And part of that may be because of what you just said. He was just there. He knew he wasn't there as a race car driver. He was there, as a race fan who got the chance to be a race car driver. He was never going to be competing for championships or what have you. So him taking the time, being able to take that time to look around and really put himself where he was and appreciate what he was able to be a part of. You hear too many drivers today talk about not taking that chance. And maybe it wasn't their last race, but you hear guys that, are now in the Cup Series and are like, what I'd love to go run a late model race again at Hickory and just feel what it felt like to be in victory lane there. Some of these moments that you never just take the time to stop and really appreciate doesn't even cover it, but just understand how far you've come and almost kind of put yourself in the moment. NASCAR, this is pun intended, I guess, it's a fast-paced sport. I mean, on the weekends, these guys are especially today, they're shuffled from event to event and sponsor obligation to the next, and then flown in and flown out. And as sad as it is that was so close to losing him altogether, it's stories like that are so important to hear, because it's reminders like that for drivers or anybody really to have those moments, to take that time to look around appreciate where you are.
And there's so many stories about guys that we know as champions, as racing winners, as whatever. But there's the humanitarian side. There is the leadership, for the want of a better term. The why you're so respected, why people want your opinion, kind of side of people. That I remember. I went by Dale Earnhardt's office there at his race shop, at his own race shop, one day, and there was it was a young driver, who's still around today, quite honestly, but he's more involved with his son. But he was in there talking to Dale, and in Dale's office, and people sought Dale out a lot of times just to ask him questions. Especially if they've had a wreck or they had something wrong, because Dale was always the guy they thought, if anybody would give me good advice, it would be Dale Earnhardt. And because he wasn't going to give you flowers, he wasn't going to give you talk about the color of the sky or the clouds. He's going to tell you, this is how it is, son. This is how it is. He'd be very straight and very matter of fact. And so this driver walked out, and I walked in, and I said, what was that about? I walked in, and I said, Dale said, oh, he wanted to come talk a little bit. And I said, what did he ask you? And he said, well, he asked me about several things, and I said, well, give me an example, because we were getting ready to do an interview, and he said, I said, well, he asked me about, you ever think about getting hurt? And he was in that bad wreck at last year at the end of the year. I said, yeah. I said, what'd you tell him? He said, I told him, hey, if you climb in that car and you're thinking about getting hurt, you will. Mm-hmm. He looked at me, and I said, that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? I said, he said, yep. He said, and he said, and he said, what would you have said to him? And I said, well, I'm not a race car driver, but you asked my opinion, and I always use the cup of coffee story. And he said, how's that? And I remember telling Dale, and I said, if you have someone hold a hot cup of coffee in front of them, and they stare at that cup of coffee, then it's scalding hot. And if they stare at that cup of coffee and try to walk 10 feet without spilling it, they'll spill it every time. But if they look up and forget they got that cup of coffee in their hand and they just walk, they won't spill a drop. So if you're thinking about it, it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And he said, I like that. Mm-hmm. He said, but I'm not a big fan of coffee. And it's the people sought out the Dale Earnhardts and the Ned Jarretts of the world. When a prime example of, remember Dale Earnhardt tried all those years to win the Daytona 500, and we all know the story about how Ned Jarrett is up there in the booth on CBS, and his son Dale is somehow in that year, driving for Joe Gibbs Racing, has a chance to win the race. And Ned's comments were classic, and everybody's heard him. It's the Dale and Dale story. I'm pulling for Dale Jarrett. Dale, don't lay him down on the inside. And so I'm doing because it was CBS, and I didn't work for CBS. I worked for ESPN and ABC's, but I'm doing MRN that day. I'm down there in the pits, and so, but I know, and I hear CBS is looking for Martha Jarrett. They can't find her because she never watched the races. She would listen on the radio. Martha was the biggest MRN fan, and rightfully so, because MRN is where you knew you got honest, straightforward facts. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, and if it was happening, if Barney Hall said it, it was true. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of her favorite people came up through MRN.
And
she has a lot of love for that.
Exactly. So she's sitting, and I knew where she was, obviously. She's sitting inside the Busch van with MRN on, right behind the pit road, not far from Victory Lane. And I'll go over to that van with my MRN microphone, and I'm sitting there, I walk over to the window, and she's got her head down and her hands in her face, and these last few laps are going by, and Dale Jarrett's racing Dale Earnhardt. And she's listening, and then so the CBS camera saw me over there, and they come running, and they get a shot of Martha through the window, and she's got her hands in her face, and she's just got the radio. She's not watching the race, and she obviously can't see television because it's right. In the van. So, but this is the emotion. So Ned, we all know Dale Jarrett won the race, and so the next week is ESPN racing, ABC racing. So Ned and I, typically in the usual fashion, we're at the hotel, and I'm riding to and from the track with Ned, and Ned's telling me, "Oh my gosh," he said, Dale Earnhardt's been trying to win that race forever, and here I am on national television pulling for my son Dale." So I broke every rule of broadcasting and professionalism and being. And I said, "No, you didn't." I said, Ned, So he said,
"I don't think there are rules."
I'm sorry. Next week, the next week was Atlanta. So so he said, we got right to the track. He said, I got to go find Dale. So will you come with me? I said, he's going to be mad. He's going to be mad and be upset. I said, okay, I'll go with you, Ned. So we get out of the Busch van. We parked right there inside the compound, because you could with the Anheuser Busch van. We walk right in the garage, and we're walking over toward the hauler there, the Goodwrench hauler, and Dale's coming out with his fire suit on to get ready to go practice. And he looks at Ned, and he stops, and Ned stops. And it looked like two gunslingers that were like 20 paces apart. And Ned just put his head down and kept walking, and Dale walked over, and they got 4 or 5 feet apart. And then Ned walks up, and he says, Dale, he said, I don't know what to say. This is typical Ned Jarrett now. I don't know what to say. He said, here you are. You've meant so much of this sport and all of us, and you're trying to win the Daytona 500 all these years, and here I am on national television pulling for my son, and I just have to come tell you. And Dale reaches out and puts his hand on Ned's chest, And he says, "Wait a minute, Ned, hold up." He said, "You're a racer, great racer over the years. I'm a racer. I understand. That's how it works." He said, "But more importantly, you're a dad, and I'm a dad, and you're just pulling for your son, and I get it. No problem. We're good, Ned. We're good." And Ned took a deep breath, saying, "Holy cow! Here's a guy that just lost, came that close to winning the race he's been chasing his whole life, and he lets me off the hook and telling me I'm okay because I'm a dad, and I did what every dad would do, is pull for his son, just like he would do years later. So, I mean, and I'm standing 3 feet behind Ned, off to one side. I was standing there to catch Ned in case Dale swatted at him, and but none of that ever happened. It just shows you there's just things you don't see, and Ned apologizing to Dale, and Dale saying, "Hey, I get it."
And it's funny because you joke about standing there in case Dale swung at him, of course, but at the end of the day, like, anybody that really knew Dale like you did, story like that wouldn't surprise them.
No,
and
no.
that's the best part about Dale Earnhardt is that he is the intimidator. But anybody that really knew him, he was a dad. He was a dad. He was a lot of different things. He was a human, I guess.
Well,
I should
and
say.
you didn't want to mess with him on the track because he was. A lot of drivers didn't like him. They didn't because they didn't think he respected them. But he wasn't out there to get their respect. He was out there to beat them and win the race. And back then, it was a take no prisoners kind of guy. Dale didn't do anything that was unselfish on the racetrack. Very, very, very rarely, if ever. It was always about him taking his car and putting it where you couldn't put it. I remember the IROC race on the weekend we lost Dale. I was there doing the International Race of Champions, and Eddie Cheever, Dale's car was started toward the back, and he's working his way through the field in Daytona in the IROC car, and Cheever started up front, so he gets to Cheever, who's running like second or third. And Cheever runs him all the way in the grass in turn one, down on the apron in the grass, wide open, in an IROC Camaro. And Dale, in typical Dale Earnhardt fashion, never lifted, bounced his car through the grass a couple of times, came back up on the track, but he lost, 5 or 6 or 7 spots. Well, there's only a couple laps to go, so he gets back, he gains a few of those back, and then when the race is over, and Dale Jarrett won the race, and I think Cheever finished second or whatever. Earnhardt comes up behind. I'm in victory. There's only one pit reporter for the IROC, so it was me, and I'm in victory lane waiting to talk to Dale Jarrett. Dale comes in, and we're doing the interview, and our producer says, "You got to get to pit road because Earnhardt just spun Cheever out on the backstretch, on the cool down lap, and now he's right on inches off Cheever's bumper, following him down pit road." He said, "Earnhardt is pissed, So
Daddy's gonna kill Ralphie. Everyone's like, "What's gonna happen?"
We'd go running. I go running up pit road with my camera crew, and I see them parked because there are only 2 cars parked on pit road. They asked the officials parked them there out of the way. They were in the middle of pit roads. Every fan could see them. Fans didn't care about victory lane. They were watching this.
They wanted to watch the show.
This was the show here. This was the center ring of the circus. So I get up there. And when I get there, the camera crews are behind me. I told them, hang back a second, hang back. So we're shooting from the front of the car. Dale's car is parked, IROC's car is parked in behind Cheever. Cheever's still in the car with the window net up. And Dale says, "Get out of the car, man. Never hit a man in the car. Get out of the car. Never hit a man in the car." And he's talking so fast, I'm trying to hear what he's saying. Then I realize he's saying, "I've never hit a man in the car. Get out of the car." And Cheever said, "Man, I'm not getting out." He said, "Get out of the car."
Smarter than that.
Cheever, I'm not getting out. I'm not. He said, "Get out of the car, man. I've never hit a man in the car. Get out of the car." So Cheever puts the window net down. And by this time, the IROC crew guys are there, and they put the window net down. I think Cheever's trying to put it back up, but they put the window net down. Cheever climbs out of the car, and Dale's standing there waiting for him to get out of the car. And they got their IROC uniforms on, and Dale said, "Walk with me." And he takes his arm, and he just like you would see these wrestlers do, he takes his arm and puts like a half Nelson,
like a headlock kind of,
around Cheever's neck, but he's not choking him. He's just got his neck here and his head here. And they turn and they walk past me, and the camera guys want to run up in front of him. And I said, let's just walk behind him and listen. Shh, listen. So, and Earnhardt says, "Man," he said, and Eddie said, "Man, I'm sorry, man, I'm sorry." He's apologizing profusely. "Man, I'm sorry," because he could have hurt. And
It's
Dale
an
said,
IROC race, and you
It's an
could have really
IROC race
hurt
for what?
Yeah.
And Dale said, man, you realize you could hurt somebody. You can hurt somebody doing that stuff. You can't do that kind of stuff in a stock car at these speeds, down here. He said, you're better than that. He said, man, you're an Indy 500 champion. And Cheever looked at him and thinking, he said, you're an Indy 500 champion. He said, I respect that. Man, that's special. That's cool. He said, and you're better than that. You don't need to do stuff like that. I would never think an Indy 500 champion would do something like that. He said, well, I ain't going to do it again. He said, well, I just want you to know that's how you could have come real close to hurting a lot of people by doing something like that. So, man, you're better. He said, Indy 500, that's special, and you're an Indy 500 champion. And then he took his arm around Cheever. And I remember talking to Eddie, who came to work with us when he finished driving. He came to work at ABC and ESPN. I like Eddie Cheever a lot, smart guy. I guess one of the few owner drivers ever to win the Indy 500, paying for things out of his own pocket. And he said he would never forget that day and what Earnhardt said to him. He said, I expected him to be kicking my butt out there swinging, knocking me. I expected him to be just pounding me. Instead, he showed me the ultimate grace and respect and told me, he's really not only a champion, but a hell of a guy. And and so that's the kind of stuff that, people who knew Dale would tell you they fully expected him to do. You're not going to teach someone a lesson by getting in their face and popping them upside the head. You're going to teach them something by talking to them and helping them understand where they made a mistake. And I think, and that's what I wish a lot of people today understood.
Like I said before, plenty more where that conversation came from. And of course, even plenty more conversations to come in the future, because I will always love sitting down with my dad and talking about racing or talking about anything, really. Like I said, we both love to talk, and we love to talk to each other. So I'm very grateful for any time that I get to do that with him. Before I go, I want to remind you, obviously follow us on everything. That's a given. That's the whole spiel. I'll give you that in a second. But don't forget, we do have something called the Punchline, which is essentially a call-in line where you can reach us and leave a message. You can ask me a question or ask for maybe a story that you want to hear told from me or my dad. I don't know. It's really just, let's be real. It's a call-in line. Make it what you want. Just behave, okay? Be good. Let's all act like adults around here for once. I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to you guys. If you want to call the Punchline, the link to it is in the Instagram bio. Which leads me to my next point. Follow us on Instagram at rollin.punches. It has everything you need to know when it comes to finding us on podcast apps. We're on all of your favorite podcast apps, and we're also on YouTube. Because hello, don't you want to see my smiling face? That sounded more like a threat than a question. Sorry. My mom does, at least. So she likes to watch it on YouTube, and she gives us a thumbs up, and you should do it too. All right. That's all I have for you this week. Thank you guys so much. I love you so much. Mom, thank you so much. I love you so much. And till next time, bye.